Perfect. All right. Welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to be looking at loops, iterables, and iterators. So, any doubts from the previous chapters until now with data structures? Assignment 3 should just now be live. I posted that just before this class started. And you should also have the links to all the recordings in chat. All right, so let's get started. So the first thing we want to look at is loops. So what are loops? Loops are a construct in coding which allow us to reuse certain portions of our codes and execute it a number of times, right? This repeated execution of a set of statements is also called an iteration, right? So one time you run a part of a loop, it's called an iteration, and multiple iterations make up the entire loop, right? Also, loops enable iteration on Python objects that are capable of returning its members one at a time. So we'll have a look at these as well. These basically mention to your data structures such as dictionaries, lists, tuples, which are ordered, right? So if they are ordered, you'll be able to use loops on them. So for loops, you will learn the for loop, you will learn the while loop, and you will also learn how to nest for loops. Then in iterable objects, you will get uh, arrays, lists, dictionaries, and tuples. Again, these should be ordered and you should be able to use them in your loops. And then common functions that are used to loop is range, right? So we'll learn about all of these in today's class. So the first thing you need to know about loop is you need to use the for keyword, right? So when you use the for keyword, you're able to start creating your loop. And in this example shown here, we first have a list, right? It's called student names list. And then we have a for loop starting here. So we write for, and then the name, and then we give it a variable name. So in this case, we say student name. So you can say anything like X, and this variable will be used inside your loop. Then we use the keyword in, and then after in, we have the name of the list. And what this does is it allows you to select each part of your list one by one, right? So it will first give you David, then John, then Simon, and so on, right? And you will get an output which will look something like this. So let's have a look at this in PyCharm so that it's clearer. All right, so let's create our list. In here, let's put a bunch of names. John. And we can also have anything else in here, right? So we can have numbers and so on. Now what I'll do is I'll create a for loop using the for keyword, right? Now I'll give it a variable name. So let's say I want to choose X, and then I'll say in, right? And then this in denotes what I want to iterate over, right? And what I want to iterate over right now is the list. So let's write the name of the list, and then I write a colon, right? This is how you start off your loop. Then once you make the colon and hit enter, you will see it indents your code, right? And this will be exactly one tab, right? And what this means is whatever you write in this tabbed area comes under the loop, right? So whatever's after the colon and tabbed comes under the loop. So if I write print x, right? So what we're doing over here is we're iterating over list one using the variable x and then printing it out one by one, right? So if I run this code, you'll see everything in the list gets printed one by one, right? So this is the very simple example of how you can write your first loop. Any doubts so far? All right, so let's make it a little more complicated. Let's have a look at our slides. So strings are also an array of bytes, right? So you can also use a string to loop, right? So you can have a string instead of your list, and then you will also, again, you will have a variable to denote the thing that you're iterating over, right? And then you can iterate over a string as well, right? So let's have a quick look at this. So let's say instead of this, I just type out my name, right? And let's call it string one to make it more clear. So this will do the exact same thing. If I try to run this, it will go over each character in the string one by one and print it out, right? And I can do whatever I want with this X, right? So now, for example, let's say I don't want to print it out. I want to add it to the end of a string and then print it out. Let's say I have another string, call it string, and let's say it starts with hello, okay? And a little space at the end. Now what I can do here is I could say, let's say string 3 equals string 1, sorry, equals x plus string 2, right? And what this will do is every time we go over a value inside this string, it will add it to the second string, which is this, and store it in this variable, string 3. Now we can print out this will equal string 3. And all of this indented portion will come to the loop, right? So this will be run as long as we still have characters in the string. So if I try to run this, you'll see we get a plus hello and then k plus hello, right? I think I did it the other way around. What I really wanted to do was string 2 plus x. So if I run this now, you'll see this gets attached at the end, right? So what we did here was we took each and every character in A, right? We call it X. Then we added it to another string, stored it in a third variable, and then printed that third variable out each and every time, right? So whatever's under this indentation will be done multiple times. And then if I hit backspace, now we're out of the loop. So whatever I print out here will only actually get printed out once, right? So let's print something else out to make it clear. Yeah, world. As you can see, this only gets printed out once because this is not tabbed, right? This is not inside this loop. Does this make sense to everyone? All right. Let me know if I'm going a little too fast. This is a probably a portion which is not that easily understood, right? So we just learned about the for loop. Now we have our while loop, right? So what does the while loop do? It also executes. I see a raised hand. All right. Lethu, can you please go ahead? I think you're still on mute if you're trying to speak. All right, looks like might have been a mistake. Let's move on. So we have our while loop over here, right? So how the while loop works is you'll put a condition in front of the keyword while, right? And as long as that condition is true, it will keep executing the commands that are inside the loop, right? So as long as your condition is true, it will keep executing this loop, right? So let's have a look at what a while loop looks like. All right, so let's get rid of all of this. Now let's create a new variable. Let's call it x and give it the value 0, right? And let's say I want to print out every number from 0 till 10, right? So how I would do that normally is I would say something like print x and then print x plus 1, right? And then so on all the way till x plus 10, right? And then when I print it out, we'll see all the numbers. But this is quite tedious, right? So instead of doing that, what we can do is we can start a while loop and say that while x is less than 11, print x, right? But if I just do this, the value of x never goes up and we will just get a bunch of zeros, right? So if I try to run this, you'll see that this keeps on running and we just keep getting zeros, right? And if I don't press the red square to stop it here, it will just keep on running because this never becomes false, right? So I'll stop it with the red button, and or you'll see it shows an error, but that just means I stopped it manually, right? Now, a thing I can add here to make it so that it works, I'll say x plus plus, right? So or x plus equals 1, right? And what x plus equals 1 does is it increases the value of x by 1 before it goes back up and starts the loop again, right? So now if I run this, you'll see it prints out all the values from 0 to 10, right? And let's have a quick look at how it does that, right? So we start off our code with x equals 0. Then we reach line number 3 where it says while x less than 11. So is 0 less than 11? Yes, right? So it goes inside the loop. Here it will print out x, which is what we get over here, 0, right? Then goes to line number 5 and x's value increases by 1. So now x has the value of 1. Once that is done, the code now goes back to the third line and checks again. So it will check, is x less than 11? So 1 is less than 11. Again, it will go in here to line 4, print out x, which is 1. Then it will go to line number 5, increase the value of x by 1, which will make it 2. And then it will go back to line number 3 and keep on going, right? So at the last point, when x's value reaches 10, let's say, we get back here, right? X is less than 11. Yes, that is correct. Then we print out the value of x, which is 10, right? We print this out. And then we increase the value of x by 1. So it becomes 11 now. This time when it goes back up and checks, right? So if we say while x less than 11, now x is not less than 11 because it is equal to 11. So it does not execute this and reaches the end of the code, right? Which is the imaginary line 6. Understood? Any questions? I'll just give it a minute's break here. Just let you absorb it all in. Share the slide screen.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you please repeat on the conditional manipulator? I didn't quite understand it very well.
Yeah, so we have our condition in the while loop, right? So over here, we have our condition. And this condition will remain true unless we do something in the loop which will work towards making this false, right? So basically what we are doing inside that helps us get to a false while statement, right? That is what we call our condition manipulator. So in this case, line number 5 will be our condition manipulator because it increases the value of x each loop so that it eventually becomes greater than 11, right?
Okay.
A conditional manipulator is basically your statement that ensures that your while loop doesn't keep on running forever, right? So if I, for example, remove this conditional manipulator, we'll just keep on getting 0 because the value of x is not increasing, right?
Okay.
Okay. All right. So next up, we have nested loops. So if you remember from if statements, we can put an if statement within an if statement, right? So using a similar logic, you can also put a loop within a loop, right? So for example, let's have a quick look at this. So let's say I want to make a pattern print out on my console, right? Which looks something like this. So we have 5 stars, then we have 4 stars, then 3, then 2, and then 1, right? So the easy way to do this would just be to put these in print statements, right? And then the rest as well. And if we print them out, we'll get all the answers over here, right? But what if we want to use a loop to make these? So we have 5 rows. So let's first create a variable called x, give it the value 0, and say while x is less than 5, do something, right? So every time we are in a row, we should print out that many number of stars, right? That's the idea. So now in here, we can create another variable. Let's call it y, right? And let's not forget to manipulate our object. So let's make it x plus equals 1. Now in here, what we can do is we can just write another while loop that iterates over y, right? And we can say while y is less than x, right? And we just do print and then star. And once we've printed out the entire row, we want to print a new line, right? So now if I try to run this code, you'll see the star goes on forever. That's because we forgot to manipulate y as well. Right? I would again remind you, if you're not uh, asking any questions, please mute yourself. Thank you. All right. So now if I try to run this, we get something like this, right? So I put the new line the other way around. It should be like this. All right. Now we see these characters one line at a time, right? This is because of a limitation in the print, which only allows us to print one, sorry, which automatically prints out the new line at the end, right? So, but as you can see, using this loop, what we are able to achieve is that in the first line, we only have 1 star. Then in the second line, we have 2 stars. Then the third line, we have 3 stars. And in the fourth, 4, and so on, right? Now I want you to take a minute and just look at this loop I've created over here and try to understand how this is happening, right? Before I try to explain it. And if you are able to come up with an explanation, you can mute yourself and speak up. That's fine. Okay. Nobody? All right. So let's have a quick look. So let's start over the top again, right? So first we have x equals 0, right? So then we get to the third line where it says while x is less than 5. So is 0 less than 5? Yes, so it goes inside. Then we get x plus equals 1. So x's value is now 1 and y's value is 0. So I do while y is less than x. So y is 0 and x is 1. 0 is less than 1. So it goes inside, prints out the star, which we get over here. Then increase the value of y with 1, right? Now it goes back up and over here it will check. Okay, is 1 less than 1? No, right? So this time it does not execute this part of the code and goes to line number 9, which is outside of this loop, right? Now line number 9 just prints out a new line, which is what we get over here, which is just a blank line, right? And then we go to this line. And we also start the loop all over again. So we go over here, is x less than 5? 1 is less than 5, so it goes to line number 4. Here, x increases its value by 1. So now x's value is 2. And y resets the value to 0. Now 0 is less than 2. So it goes in here and prints out the star, increases the value of y by 1, right? So now y's value is 1. So we go back up here. Is 1 less than 2? Yes. So it prints out another star, which we get over here. And in the third line, we don't get a star. Why? Because y's value increases by 1. It becomes 2. And then 2 is not less than 2. So it goes to line number 9 and prints out the new line, right? And this keeps on going until we hit 5 less than 5 and the loop stops executing, right?
Can
So
you please repeat the explanation? I didn't get it clearly.
yeah, sure. So on the top we have x equals 0, right? That's the value. We start off with x, then we go to line number 3. Now in line number 3 we check, is x less than 5? 0 is less than 5, right? So it goes to line number 4, increases the value of x by 1. So now the value of x is 1. Here y is equal 0. Then we go to this while loop and check, is y less than x? 0 is less than 1. So this is true. And it goes to line number 7 and prints out this star over here, right? Then we go to line number 8 and increase the value of y by 1. So now y's value is 1. Then we go back up to line number 6 to check, is y still less than x? 1 is not less than 1. So it skips everything inside the loop and goes to line number 9 and prints out the new line, which is what we get over here, and then goes back up to check, is x less than 5? We have 1 less than 5, right? So it goes back inside again and we get x plus equals 1. So now x's value is 2 and y gets reset to 0. Then we check again, is y less than x? Yes, 0 is less than 2. So it goes inside over here, prints the star over here, and then y's value is increased to 1. We go back to line 6, 1 is less than 2, so it goes back inside this loop, prints out the second star here, and then we get y's value increased by another 1, right? So now we go back up and check, is 2 less than 2? No, right? So it doesn't go inside the loop anymore. It exits the loop to line number 9, and we get the printed out new line over here. Then it goes back up to check if x is less than 5. This time x is 2, but 2 is still less than 5. So it goes inside, increases the value of x by 1. Now it will be 3. And y is reset to 0. And we do the whole thing again, and we get 3 stars, and then 4, and then 5, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Okay. So let's go back to our presentation. All right, so that's how you create a nested loop, right? So in a similar way, what you can also do is you can have a for loop within a while loop, or a while loop within a for loop, or any combination like that, right? So it doesn't really need to be a while loop within a while loop. That's just the example I showed you, right? So I'll let you try a for loop within a while loop yourself. And you can use this example over here as well, which basically shows us a row number, right? So, and then it prints out that many amount of times within that row. So on the right, you can see row 1, it prints out just 0. In row 2, it prints out 2 numbers. In row 3, it prints out 3 numbers, and so on. So it's quite a similar fashion in which they've done it, right? So iterable functions. Now we look at the range function. So what the range function allows you to do is it directly allows you to iterate over some numbers, right? So for example, if I say for I in range 5, that will iterate from 0 all the way up to 5, but not including 5. So whatever number you specify in here is not included, right? So the syntax is start, stop, and step, right? So if you only give it one argument, it assumes that this is the stop argument and you're starting at 0. And similarly for the step option, if you do not provide a step option, it will assume that you are using the default step value of 1, right? So I have a question in chat saying, will the notes be shared? I'm not sure what notes you're referring to. If it's the slides, then certainly I can share those over Google Classroom as well. I'll upload those. Thanks for reminding me. So let's have a look at this range function in PyCharm. So for the range function, we can simply just start writing the for loop, right? So let's say I want to say for x in range 6, right? And then I say print x. Now all this does is it gives us all the numbers up to 6, but not including 6, right? So now let's say I don't want to start at 0. I want to start at some other number. Let's say I want to start at 2, right? In that case, I can specify another argument in here with a comma, right? So if I do 2 comma 6 and then try to run this, now it will include 2 but exclude 6, right? So the first argument is included and the last argument is not included, right? And we can have as many numbers as you want here. So right, even if I put something like 100, it will give us everything, right? Now let's say I don't want every number from 2 to 100. I just want the even numbers, right? So for that, what I can do is I can introduce another argument and give it a step of 2, right? So step of 2 means it will start at 2 and increase its value by 2 instead of 1, right? So if I run this, we get all the even numbers, as you can see. We get 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on, right? Now I can change the step and make it higher if I want. So if I want something like 25, even that works, right? And you can see it will have a step of 25. And it will go all the way up to 100, but not including 100. So if you do 25 plus 77, you get 102, right? And 102 is greater than 100, which is why that does not get included. So these are the 3 ways you can use the range function in your for loop, right? And essentially what range is doing is it just gives you back a list, right? So if I just print out a range, okay, it will show up like this, but it is essentially a list, right? It is essentially a list from 0 to 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? So is everybody clear with range? Yes, so as I have mentioned in the chat before, uh, I've sent in the meeting recordings in the chat. I'll just repost that comment. Make sure you have that. Okay, I just reposted the comment that had all the lecture links. So if you're having problem, just try to access those. Okay. All right. So going back to range, we can create any range that we can dream of, right? And then simply just type it out and it will give you the desired result, right? So I will let you play around with range. I would recommend changing all 3 of these values a little bit here and there and just trying to see the kind of results you can come up with. So similarly, there are other uh, methods that you can use to iterate over dictionaries, to iterate over tuples, and so on, right? So for those, I would recommend you go to W3 Schools or another similar website and read up on those. So if you have a specific use case where you think it would be useful to iterate over a particular list or dictionary, there probably is a class to help you with that, right? And it will probably be very similar to how the range class works. So now we also have a break statement, right? So let's have a look at what a break statement is. So let's say I want to iterate all the way over 1000, right? And let's say I take a step of 3. But what I also want to do is that if this number x somehow has the value of 600, I want the loop to stop immediately, right? Let's say I want to do that. So for that, what I can do is I can put an if statement in here saying if x equals 600. So if x equals 600, what we want to do is we want to print at 600, and then we will write break. And what break does is it will break your loop and put you out of the loop even if this condition has not been reached yet, right? And if I do a print x normally here and try to run this, you'll see when it reaches 600, it will print out at 600 and then it breaks from the loop, right? Before actually reaching anywhere close to 1000, right? So if I did not have this, this is some what it would have looked like, right? It would have gone all the way to 999. And now that I did have this part, it breaks at 600, right? So that is what the break statement will do. It will allow you to go outside of the loop earlier, right? And there's an entire section of uh, what I would like to call funny programming, where you can say while true, right? So what this means is this basically means that your loop will go on forever, right? But inside this while true, you can have an if statement which has, let's say, some condition, right? And when that condition is fulfilled, you just say break, and that will be your exit condition for the loop instead of it being in your first line, right? Now, I don't really recommend doing this, but this is a way you can achieve a break in your loop, right? And avoid a loop that keeps on going forever. So that is essentially how the break statement works. Any questions? All right. So another statement quite similar to the break statement is the continue statement, right? Now the continue statement is quite similar in the way that it won't allow you to execute anything inside that loop after that point, right? But it will still continue that loop. So it will just skip all the rest of the loop, but it will still allow you to keep going. So let's see what I mean. So if I scroll up here and find 600, as you can see, it didn't print out 600, and instead of printing out 600, it actually went to this line, right? So let's have a look at what happens. So when the value of x is 600 and it reaches line 2, it says, okay, this is finally true. I can send it to line number 3 and say print at 600, right? Then it goes to line number 4 and it sees the continue statement. And what the continue statement does is it simply just returns the control of the program to the start of the loop. So it goes back to line number 1, completely skipping line number 5, which is what was printing out our 600s otherwise, right? And this might become clearer if I remove this and run it again. So as you can see, we skip 600 over here, right? And that happens because of the continue statement. So you can think of the continue statement as a way to skip one iteration of the loop, right? And then the break statement just completely halts your loop and gets you to exit it, right? So that's how both of these statements work. So this is how the continue statement works, right? I'll have you look at this example at your own pace. And then we have some additional resources. As I said, W3 Schools is one of my top resources, and that's something I used to go to a lot when I was learning how to program, right? So I would recommend going to this website. All right, and that should be the end of our lecture today. I'll upload all the lecture slides to Google Classroom. Don't worry about that. Are there any other questions?
I have a question.
Mhm.
I have a question.
Sure, yeah,
Hello?
go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to ask about the previous assignments. I haven't received the feedback.
Um, let's see. Was that assignment 2?
Both assignment 1 and 2.
So for 1, there wasn't really much for me to, I guess, review. As long as you didn't have any problems installing Python, that should be fine. As for assignment 2, I'll reach out regarding that soon.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Mhm.
In the first example, you had two strings and I think five numbers, and when you used the loop, it only printed out numbers. What's the reason for that?
I think you might be remembering that wrong. Let's try to run it again. It should have printed out everything. So I had something like this from what I remember, right? Then if I try to loop through this, I say for x in list 1, and then I say print x, right? So if I run this, as you can see, we get the strings, right? So yeah, if you iterate over a list, it will give you each and every element. Doesn't really matter what the type is, right?
So in this situation, when we are using loops saying for x, we have already assigned x as the variable where we put the elements in the list of what?
Mhm. So
Are we,
sorry, the
are we
question.
defining x as a variable?
Yeah, so we define x as a variable, right? And then each time it comes back to this line, this variable x gets assigned a new value, right? So for the first time, it has the value of the string. The second time, it has the value of this string. Then the third time, it will have the value of this number, and so on, right? So for example, I guess what you're trying to ask is how can x be both a string and a number, right? So that is something that is very much possible, right? So if I define another variable, let's call it y, and give it the value of this, and then I print out y. After I'm done using it as a string, I can now reassign it as an integer. And this is something that is not allowed in every programming language, but Python does allow you to do this, right? So you can redefine a string as a number, and if I run this, we'll have no problems, right? But there are some programming languages where this is not fine.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? All right. I'm going to hit stop recording.